My name is Laura DeMarco, and I will be discussing my article, No Room to Fall, Criminal Justice Contact and Neighborhood Disadvantage, published in Social Problems. So this article explores the association between contact with the criminal legal system and neighborhood attainment, or in other words, asking whether having contact with the legal system is associated with living in a more disadvantaged neighborhood. My first question is, are different types of criminal justice contact, incarceration, conviction without a custodial sentence or arrest associated with changes in neighborhood disadvantage? And then asking whether having a household member incarcerated, regardless of your own criminal history, is similarly associated with living in a more disadvantaged neighborhood. And then I also examine whether these associations vary by race and ethnicity. I was motivated to explore these questions for a few reasons. First, I'm just really interested in neighborhoods as a really important element of understanding racial and economic inequality today. And then second, thinking really carefully about the breadth of the carceral state. We know that incarceration is really the tip of the iceberg of carceral contact. Lesser types of criminal legal system contact, such as arrests or convictions without custodial sentences, are more common experiences that still have really meaningful effects for the people who experience them. We also know that the effects of mass incarceration bleed over to the families, partners, and friends of the incarcerated individual. So all of these kind of quote unquote lesser types of criminal legal system contact can be really detrimental to health, well-being, economic outcomes, and other aspects of life. But we didn't really know much about how they impacted neighborhood attainment. I also think it's interesting because the sort of breadth of criminal legal contact experiences that people have has really interesting methodological implications for people who are interested in identifying the consequences of incarceration. So if you're interested in knowing whether having a criminal record or being incarcerated is associated with living in a worse neighborhood, you have to really carefully consider the comparison group. So descriptively, you could compare neighborhoods of formerly incarcerated people to neighborhoods that never incarcerated people live in. But if people with convictions are included in the never incarcerated group, and conviction is in fact associated with living in a more disadvantaged neighborhood, you're going to be misidentifying the impact of incarceration. Similarly, a lot of this type of work employs a life course perspective, utilizing longitudinal data to compare the neighborhoods people live in before or after incarceration. But we know now that incarceration is often a late stage of criminal legal system contact, with people amassing long criminal records before they're ever sentenced to prison or jail. So we really need to fully understand the consequences of pre-incarceration criminal records if we want to understand the consequences of incarceration as well. This paper uses data from the National Longitudinal Survey of Youth 1997 cohort, combined with data from the U.S. Decennial Census and American Community Survey, which were used to create the measures of neighborhood disadvantage. So the NLSY 97 is a nationally representative longitudinal data set of people in the United States who were born between 1981 and 1984. These are publicly available data, but the geo identifiers, the information about where people are living, are not. So I had to request access to restricted data and travel to the Bureau of Labor Statistics in Washington, D.C. to conduct these analysis in a secure computing room. So I created measures of individual criminal legal system contact and, of course, a bunch of control variables, and merged those with measures of census tract data that the respondents were living in over about 15 waves of data collection, so that I could basically examine whether changes in criminal history were associated with changes in neighborhood disadvantage. And neighborhood disadvantage here refers to an index of the percent of the census tract living below the poverty line, the percent that's unemployed, and the proportion of female-headed households in the census tract. I find that incarceration alone is not associated with living in a worse or more disadvantaged neighborhood. When breaking criminal justice contact down a bit more, it turns out that the first conviction a person experiences without a custodial sentence is a meaningful inflection point for neighborhood conditions. So having a conviction without a sentence to prison or jail is associated with living in a worse neighborhood. I didn't find evidence that the effect of criminal legal system contact, particularly conviction, varied by race at all. I'm a little tentative about drawing strong conclusions there because disaggregating by both legal status and race and ethnicity, the style sizes start to get a little bit small and statistical power decreases. I think this is a place we could really use better data on both legal system contact and neighborhood attainment. And then for household member incarceration, I find that the effect of household member incarceration on neighborhood disadvantage is concentrated among white young adults only, which is consistent with this more to lose hypothesis. So having a household member incarcerated is associated with increased neighborhood disadvantage for white young adults only. So the more to lose hypothesis basically states that for those who have more resources, advantages, or privileges to begin with, we'll see kind of the most penalties for, in this case, incarceration. And this is really important when discussing neighborhood attainment because the types of neighborhoods that people live in are really different regardless of system contact. Decades of segregation, redlining, discrimination, and wealth inequality mean that Black Americans, and to a lesser extent Hispanic Americans, live in neighborhoods with much higher levels of unemployment and poverty compared to white Americans. So if you're looking to identify the effects of a status loss like that associated with incarceration, those effects are going to be easiest to identify for those who have more to lose, right? So for people who will have contact with the criminal legal system, especially things like incarceration, they might already be living in the most disadvantaged neighborhoods when they are incarcerated. So it means that we can't identify a causal effect. There simply aren't worse neighborhoods to move to. And I argue that the more to lose hypothesis is also relevant for thinking about cumulative disadvantage across the life course, because by the time a person is incarcerated, they may have experienced many other disadvantages in their life course, especially other types of criminal legal system contact that might mute those consequences of incarceration where we would otherwise expect to see them. I think what I show here is that it's really important to think broadly about the impacts of punishment, including both when we would expect to see an impact of any type of criminal legal system contact and for whom, especially from this life course perspective, and then to also always contextualize those findings within the broader landscape of durable racial and economic inequalities in the United States.